I see the Lord, and His train fills the temple.
This is Pastor Terry. I'm with Jessica Mendez today, and she's going to give a little bit of her testimony about healing and deliverance. That, in fact, she just received some powerful deliverance a few weeks ago. And although she's been in our church, how long have you been here now, Jessica?
Going 12 years.
12 years. So sometimes it takes 12 years to get delivered. And even though in Jessica's case, I think you knew about deliverance before you came here, right?
Correct.
Because I think I went to the church that you previously were attending, and you were familiar with it somewhat from that. And then she ended up here at PTW about 12 years ago, and she's involved in the ushers ministry and also getting ready to work with our children. So she does a lot of things around here, you know. And over the years, I prayed for her quite a few times and seen quite a few deliverances, very powerful deliverances, as a matter of fact. But I guess the point we want to try to make today is that sometimes you may think that you got fully delivered, but maybe you didn't. And she was still struggling with some things. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and let her kind of explain how we went from 12 years ago and several deliverances over the years into where she is today and kind of how she got there. So you want to take it from here, Jessica?
I sure will. I did learn about how deliverance works, and you know, like you said, you went to our church and I hear it. But I think I've been to your office so many times that we're like, okay, we're done. But we come to a place where you're like, why am I still having this? You know, and sometimes I say this little prayer and I deliver myself or but this time that I came to you, I actually, now that I think about it, I said, I'm done. I'm done with this. Because sometimes we think we are done with it, but then in reality, you're not, because it keeps coming. And I was dealing with fear. And I wasn't sure why, but because I was in church since I was a child. And, when your children, you, of course, you go to church and, with your parents. But when I was 18, I had a car accident. And, they did ask me for my identification and all these things. I didn't have any of it. So something did happen there. They did take me in. They put me in jail. And I was in this little cell, which at that time, sometimes you feel like, oh, it's just a place. You go in and you come out and you're done. But with your preaching and everything, come to find out that all this time I was in bondage with fear. And you can ask how? Well, because I was scared. I was scared to drive. I was scared to be in front of an officer. Eventually, I even told you that when I will see your Mr. Robert, I'll be like, oh my gosh, your son-in-law, what?
Police officer, and he's security at the church, and so when she saw his police uniform, she kind of freaked out.
I got fearful, and I'm like, but why? So all of these things, I mean, it's a horrible feeling. But I think when you come to a place where you're like, you're done, and I called you, and I'm like, Pastor, I called Sadet, I'm like, I need to see Pastor. But it was something that I thought I was, over it. But honestly, I wasn't.
Tell about, what the real fear was, how it operated, because you told me about, it made you afraid that if you did something wrong, that you were going to be punished, or some people were going to talk about you, or something. Go into that a little bit, because that's a really important part of how the fear operated.
Well, the fear operated was when I received a jury duty notification for me to go, and I was like, not this. And I thought, honestly, I was okay with it. You know, it doesn't come, I'm good. When it showed up, it triggered something inside of me. And so I was fearful ongoing. And I'm like, why do I get fear ongoing if it's just jury duty where you just sit?
Yeah.
But I was afraid of, like, something can happen. Maybe I would do a mistake. Maybe I would say something wrong and I would get in trouble. Even not even in that. I think more as in leadership. Even I wanted to work in the children's ministry, and I was like, no, because what if I do something wrong? Maybe I'll grab somebody wrong, and I will get in trouble. You know, by the law.
Yeah.
So that was just not one thing. It was basically my whole life that I was dealing with that.
So she was basically afraid that if she did something wrong or if she made a mistake, there was going to be a punishment involved in it. So it kept her from stepping out doing things that people would just normally do. And she didn't really realize where the root of it was, I think, until we began to talk about it. And she told me about the accident that she had. A friend was with her, I believe, and she asked the friend, look and see if anything's coming. And they said, no, nothing's coming. She pulls out and she gets hit. And then she doesn't have her ID with her, so she goes to jail because of that. And then in the jail, she gets very fearful. And we talked about that in that prison, it was like a spirit of fear was probably even in the cell there. And spirit of slavery, we talked about a spirit of slavery that leads to fear again. It's in Hebrews, you know, you've not received the spirit of slavery that leads to fear again. So we kind of got it back to that as where maybe the entry point of this thing was. And so she made a mistake. She didn't have her ID with her. She got punished. She went to jail, and it was a fearful thing for her. And so from that point on, she was afraid if she ever did anything wrong, you know, that she was going to end up in jail. So it's weird how your mind and the demons work with you. And she's carried that since how old?
Since I was 18.
18. And now you're 21, right?
I'm 21.
No.
No, I'm 44.
So you carried it all those years.
Yep.
So 26 years, right? Wow, that's a long time to carry that. And so the point that we're trying to make today is about deliverance, that many times you get delivered, but maybe a peripheral things, but never get down to the real root of where the problem is. And it's not always that easy. And so I think a lot of times people misunderstand deliverance because when you read in the Bible, somebody goes in and poof, you know, Jesus says, come out, and they come out and they're free. But it's not quite like that in most cases. Most cases, it's a process over time. And the first time you go in for deliverance, you typically don't get everything. And many times it's because you don't remember, or you don't equate the demonic issues with a particular incident or when that incident happened. And I know we were praying for somebody recently, and we had struggled getting them delivered. And they got just a little bit, and something happened, and they remembered something that they'd forgotten. And that was a key. And that actually had something to do with witchcraft. And when we prayed over that, there was a good deliverance. But then after that, other things came up because they were still struggling with some issues. And so after that deliverance, more things came to the surface. And they remembered things that they had forgotten. They didn't even remember those things. And in fact, they kind of blocked it out. There was things that when they told me, I went, you blocked that out? You should have remembered that. But your mind kind of plays these games with you. And so when they brought that up, then in fact, we just prayed this week and there's a major deliverance there. So I think with Jessica, that's kind of what happened.
Yes, the mind does play with you. I mean, even with my kids, I was afraid of even taking them to a dental cleaning. It was bad. You know, just, you know, I even if I drive I got a new car. Well, it's not new, but I mean, new to me.
Yeah.
But you have to get your place, your plates and all your stickers and everything. They're like, you're okay, you can drive it. And my mind was like, don't drive it, because if you drive it, you're gonna get stopped and this is gonna happen. So my mind was just controlling, my life. And I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm done with this.
So you finally just got fed up with it.
Yes, and I was like, before, sometimes, you think it's gone, but when something shows up and it triggered, and you're like, okay, it's still there.
It's still there.
It's still there.
Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things that people don't realize about deliverance is that the demonic, they operate several different ways. One thing is they like to hide and make you think they're not there, And even when you talk about Leviathan, the spirit of pride in Leviathan, it's a fleeing serpent. And so he has a tendency to run and to hide. And so many of these things hide out and make you think, you're okay. And then something happens and it comes up again. And then you start going back and forth and playing with this thing until you finally realize, wait a minute, there's something not right here. And so she would get a lot of deliverances, and from different things, but just never really at the root of it. And I think maybe what happens is if we don't get down to the real root issue, it brings back the other things. They have a tendency to bring them back in. And that's why it's important to get the strong man or the root, So let me ask you, this has been a few weeks ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago maybe?
I think so.
Something like that? So have you noticed a big difference since that deliverance than all the others?
I have.
So what's the main difference?
Once all this, once I was with deliverance, and you did tell me, hey, you need to stick with the word, if it comes, you need to rebuke it, and I have done that, praise the Lord. But I did get a jury duty letter.
So right after you got delivered,
you got a few days later.
And so the Lord always allows you to be tested, right?
Yes. And I said, praise the Lord. But I didn't get the way I used to get. So I took it.
So you felt different, you reacted different.
Yes, I reacted different. And so I was like, okay, I'm good. So, and then you did ask me, what is it, something that will get you out of the, to make sure if it's not there. I did join the children's ministry.
So that was a big deal for you.
That was a big deal for me.
So like a lot of people would look at that and say, what's the big deal about that? Well, when you're dealing with what she was dealing with, she's probably thinking, well, if I go in there and I mess up, the parents are going to get mad at me. They're going to call Child Protective Services.
Yep.
I'm going to go to jail. I mean, that's what she's thinking.
Yeah.
And why is she thinking that? Well, that's an inordinate scenario, really. It's something that 99.9% of the time is just not going to happen. But the demons make you feel like it's going to happen. And so it's an obsessive thing that you can't, no matter how much you try to die. I think one of the questions that somebody sent in was, how do you know something's of the flesh or something is a demonic thing? So things of the flesh, it talks about putting to death the deeds of the flesh. So if it's of the flesh, you have some degree of control. You can say no. You can just not do it. And you have to choose against your flesh. But when it's demonic, no matter how much you don't want to do it, you still do it.
Yeah.
Like an addiction or something. And so in this case, it was a fear. And the demons had so much control and power that it paralyzed her. And she couldn't do anything about it. So it was demonic. It wasn't a thing of the flesh. It was demonic. And when she realized that, I forget all the things that we did. I think you had to forgive the girl and yourself. I don't know what all we went into to break the legal rights, for that. But it was a very powerful deliverance.
It was.
Very strong.
Yes, very strong, because I wanted to push you away and just run out. But
And of the other deliverances I've seen, there's been some really good ones, but this was it was kind of like another level. So it was a very strong spirit of fear. And so what people need to realize is this is real. This is not fake. This is not a game. This is not somebody just, having some reaction to an event. It's a demonic thing that has strength and control and power. And but she was willing to, after all these years, 12 years here, it took her. But so that goes to show you that you may not get there right away. And I think you have to kind of really do a lot of introspection and searching your heart, seeking the Lord, really wanting to be totally free so you can serve God. And I always knew Jessica loved the Lord, you know. Never understood why she would start something, quit. And then, you know, it's like, what's the deal here, girl?
Yeah.
You know, but you did that a lot, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And so, and that's why I've been preaching in the last few weeks about judging. We have to be very careful about judging people, because if you see something like that and someone say, well, they just can't stick with it, or, you know, you might judge them for it, but you don't realize what's going on in the background and what they're struggling with. It's not that they just don't want to do it. It's just they don't know how to do it. And until you get that deliverance, it's very difficult to overcome it.
It is. I was good on, like, if somebody wanted to do something, oh yeah, we'll help you get in. But when it had to be me, I would be like, no, I'll just wait. But it was because of what I was dealing with. So. And
an event, what happens with a lot of people that have these events that happen, but they don't realize the impact that event had many times, especially if you're very young. But even later on, she was 18, but at that time you didn't know anything about deliverance, and so it wasn't even an issue for you about deliverance. But so later on she learns about deliverance, but she doesn't connect things back to that event until years later, 26 years, and even knowing about deliverance for at least 12 years or more. So you can know about deliverance and know that the demonic realm is real, and still miss it, you know.
Well, now that you're saying that, I mean, I didn't know about deliverance at that age, 18, until even when I met you at the church. I was just married, but I still didn't know how you explained your class. You know, you do deliverance classes and everything. But that's why it took that long, because nobody teaches us that.
Yeah.
We're not taught. So we are dealing with stuff until you come to a place where, you know, you explain and everything, and you're like, oh, okay, this is what I've been dealing with.
Yeah. So you advocate deliverance? Think it's a good thing?
Yes. It's a very good thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
so excuse me. What happened? You know, you said you got a jury summons. So what happened on that? Did you have to go, or did they?
Well, I have to call them Friday to see if I get accepted to go in. But
so you're praying that you don't get accepted.
Honestly, I'm like, Lord, I don't want to go. But if it's your will, I'll go.
Yeah. But you're okay with this now.
I'm okay with it now, and I'm okay when I'm driving and I see an officer.
Oh yeah.
I'm good.
So you used to have trouble driving.
Yes. Like, I didn't want to see a cop next to me, like a car cop, or even, I mean, he's not even looking at me, but in my mind, he's looking at me.
Well, I don't like cops next to me either. You know, I agree. I try to stay ahead of them, you know. No. But yeah, I know. But it's like there's such a thing as a normal fear, but this is an inordinate fear. It's not normal. It's not natural. So when you have something like that, you can probably pretty well bet you got some sort of demonic component operating here. Very, very likely. And until you get delivered from that, you're going to struggle with it, no matter how much you try to die to it and overcome it.
Now my guilt is gone, and my sin has been forgiven. Thank you, Lord.